stop the recording.
All right. Okay. So brothers and sisters, ladies and gentlemen, members of our esteemed community, I'm here to really, with a sense of profound honor and responsibility to address this topic that is very dear to me and to pretty much all of us. And I call it the transnational identities of the Igbo-American. For those of us who were born in Nigeria and now reside here in these United States, we have traversed a journey filled with both challenges and opportunities. We've transitioned from a specific ethnic identity to a broader, often imposed racial identity. This transition is not merely a shift in labels, but a transformative process that shapes our experiences, our perceptions, and our sense of belonging. In our home country, we proudly identify ourselves as Igbo. This identity is not just a name, it is deeply embedded in our history, our culture, our language, and our tradition. It connects us to our ancestors and grounds us in a community with shared values, shared norms, and customs. Our ethnic identity is the lens through which we view the world and understand our place within it. So you find our Igbo worldview expressed in our ways of doing things and being. We find it expressed in our idioms, our proverbs, our principles, philosophies, worship patterns, and laws, the names we bear, the reverence to the elders and ancestors, our omenane, the customs, traditions, and values handed down by our ancestors have been inculcated in the successive generations of core Igbos. A true indigene, for instance, of Igbo land has a high sense of self-worth. Without being arrogant, an Igbo man or woman believes he or she has a purpose in life and is always in constant dialogue with his or her chi, and will work to achieve it through diligent labor. There are no shortcuts in the Igbo DNA. There are no cutting of corners. An Igbo person has generosity, sincerity of purpose, and truthfulness taught him or her from the cradle. An Igbo person will share whatever little he or she has with whomever is in need. Any person walking into an Igbo family, for instance, or a group at table is automatically invited to join in the meal. An Igbo person has a deep-seated respect for elders and treats older people with deference. Our age grade system that has been studied all over the world has established a strict pecking order which recognizes wisdom that comes with age as an asset that society must cherish and exploit in order to make social progress. This same age grade system fundamentally implies that as we journey from cradle to the grave, that life's responsibilities and privileges come to us in the doses we can handle. It is fundamentally a rite of passage system. In most of the Igbo land, it falls on the oldest male person in any gathering to lead ceremonies like breaking of the kola nut or pouring of libation. The Igbos mark entry and exit into life with celebration. Even as an Igbo person mourns the passing of a close relative, there is simultaneous celebration with joy of what the departed person has contributed to society. Ultimately, the Igbos believe that life in itself is a circle. Nwoffiah, we say. You can, it is an interesting metaphor that aligns life in itself to even go into a shopping mall, because a 24-hour mall, at any point in time, people are going, people are coming in. And that's the way we look at life. And then you go back and then you come back again the next time, and on and on and on. The Igbos cherish our good neighborliness and communal responsibility. We have this fundamental principle of Onyaya na Nwanne, and it is this sense of collective responsibility. In Zimbabwe and South Africa, it's called the principle and philosophy of Ubuntu. I am because you are, and since you are, therefore I am. The Igbos have long lived by that mantra. And I would like to share with you also that's interesting, the unique nature of the Igbo identity and also the burden that comes with it was expressed in 1949. Funny enough, it was just about this time on June 25th, 1949, at the Igbo State Assembly in Aba, after Dr. Nnamdi Azikiwe was just elected president, and he was the young Azikiwe got up to speak. With all modesty, he began to recall certain things. And I would like to share with you just a very simple and short quote of what he says in terms of the dignity of the Igbos and where we come from and where we are placed within the historical context of this journey of the Africans. And I quote, he says, "Is it not historically significant that throughout the glorious history of Africa, the Igbo is one of the select few that have escaped the humiliation of a conqueror's sword or to be a victim of a Carthaginian treaty?" He says, "Search through the records of African history, and you will fail to find an occasion when, in any pitched battle, any African nation has either marched across Igbo territory and subjected the Igbo nation to a humiliating conquest. Instead, there is record to show that the martial prowess of the Igbo at all stages of human history has enabled them not only to survive persecution, but also to adapt themselves to the role thus thrust upon them by history." And he says that role is of preserving all that is best and most noble in African culture and tradition. And this was in 1949. And of course, decades later, Nigeria descended into the Civil War and stuff, and we all know what happened. But there's something interesting in what he says here in terms of the burden that the Igbos carry. I've had the privilege of traveling around the African continent, as I was telling our colleagues before we started formally. I just got back from Uganda barely a week and a half ago. Would you believe that there is a kingdom in Uganda that actually say, even their king, they will tell you that they themselves are Igbos, that they're Igbos of Nigeria. And this is just in Uganda. And I think what happens oftentimes is that we do not take the time to research and find our kith and kin spread all over the world. And I'm coming to some of those in terms of expressions of the Igbos in the diaspora later on in this conversation. So knowing all that stuff that informs our identity, that informs our cultural backdrop, and ultimately our worldview. Then, what then do we talk about when we say this transnational thing? Unfortunately, upon crossing the Atlantic, for those of us that arrived here in the United States, we encounter a different reality. Here, the rich tapestry of our ethnic identity is often subsumed under broader categories, such as Nigerian, of course, Black, African, African American, or African immigrant, whatever you choose. This shift is not merely a matter of semantics. It reflects a different socio-political landscape that requires us to navigate new and often challenging terrains. And sometimes we do that in form of code switching without really realizing that that's what's happening. Because again, the Igbos are very entrepreneurial, we can adapt, and even within the context of Nigeria, the Igbo person will go to any end of the world and speak the language. And then when you come to the Igbo land from any other part of the world, we still speak your language to you, as opposed to what we encounter in other places and spaces. And so when we cross the Atlantic, we are now given this other identity that we need to figure out, and we often figure it out. And we figure it out differently, and sometimes there's an underpinning of how we're figuring it all out. But people find a way to embrace and move through in the course of sometimes one day. From the time you leave your home, maybe your Igbo-ness is asserted and affirmed. And then by the time you get in the car and the cop pulls you over, your Blackness becomes the issue. By the time you get to the office, then you can become the African immigrant, and on and on. And this is in the course of the day. And so my conversation today is for us to call attention to those things that we often do without really I mean, people like Todd here, who are the psychologists, would probably be able to help us begin to unpack some of these things. Because until we recognize what they are, until we understand how we are moving through life, code switching and adapting to some of these identities, we may not understand how it actually affects us, and sometimes even affects our wellness and our well-being, because we are just moving and we keep moving and we are succeeding and we keep succeeding. And then also, as we begin to have our children, then there's now a complicated identity issue, because as you, the parent, you're moving through these prisms of identity. Your children are probably not in those same buckets, so they probably start with the African-American identity and then maybe begin to go back towards the Igbo identity, while you are starting from the Igbo identity and moving towards survival as an African immigrant. And understanding where some of these things lie will help us also navigate and be able to talk to and relate to our children even a lot better. So the dilemma of navigating these multiple identity labels becomes multifaceted and profound. On one hand, we strive to preserve our unique cultural heritage, maintaining our language, customs, and traditions. On the other hand, we must contend with the external pressures of assimilation and the internal desire for acceptance within the broader African-American community and American society at large. This balancing act is a continuous negotiation between holding on to the familiar and adapting to the new. Externally, we face stereotypes and misconceptions that paint a monolithic picture of Africa and its people. And this is the reality of America. Oprah Winfrey built a school in Africa, end of story. Nobody wants to know where did she actually build this school. And somebody visits Africa, oh, I just went to Africa, kind of thing. And that's what Chimamanda Adichie talks about, when she calls it the single story narrative, which is a dangerous thing. So these misconceptions often stem from a lack of nuanced understanding of the continent's diversity and complexity. Not to talk about the continent, but even Nigeria as a country, its complexity and diversity. The media frequently portrays Africa through a narrow lens, emphasizing poverty, conflict, and disease, while ignoring the rich cultural heritage, innovation, and resilience of its people. These skewed narratives create a distorted perception that we must constantly challenge and rectify. And so we come from Nigeria as Igbos, then you come here and then trust on you this other identity, then all of a sudden you're in the workplace, you're the person that represents the entire continent of Africa. And you find yourself having to encounter and check people on some of these misconceptions. And that's a burden that we carry. And sometimes it's exhausting, because you need to get on with your life. You need to do what you're here to do and not be in spaces where you are constantly having to become the African spokesperson, or the Nigerian spokesperson, and those kinds of things. And so I'm just hinting at this. Hopefully, when we go into conversations, we can unpack some of these things a little bit more. Now, internally, then, we wrestle with the cultural clash that arises from different historical and social contexts. As an African immigrant, we experienced our experience is marked by a journey from post-colonial societies with distinct cultural frameworks to a country such as America with its own complex racial history. We bring with us a sense of pride in our heritage, but we also encounter a racialized society where our identity, purely just as Black individuals, comes with its own sets of expectations and challenges. Now, although it might be easier to point to at the time when we crossed the Atlantic and landed on the shores as the beginning of what I call these points of racial identity tensions. It's easier to say that, yeah, when we get here, that happens. But I want to also say that the reality is that these points of identity tensions actually began while we were still back home in Nigeria. And that is the part of it that we don't often face. Why do I say that? The effects of colonialism and neocolonialism left indelible marks on our psyche as we were intentionally targeted at very impressionable ages and forced to rethink, to question, and unfortunately, we are forced to believe that our ethnic identities were of lower worth in comparison to Western identities. So, as children, we were forcibly swept away by the allure of ascribed value that the colonial oppressors assigned to their own culture and language. All things Western symbolized goodness and godliness, while all things Igbo or African symbolized backwardness and evil. The magic of whiteness was born and became an inspiration and an aspiration both in our physical and spiritual realms. We codified this magic of whiteness even in our lexicon with expressions such as Beke Wabara. I'm a proud graduate of Government College Nwoffiah, got what I call as first-class education. But, and I know some of our old boys, if any of them is here, is probably going to get me in trouble, but I spoke at the convention once, and I did raise some of these things. Incredible education we did receive, and I'm sure all of us that went to secondary school in Nigeria got this amazing first-class British-oriented education. But let's think about it in my situation, for instance, as I'm sure is familiar to all of us. At age 11 or 12, sometimes if you're younger, 10, you went into the boarding school, and then you came out at age 17 or 18. In my case, at Government College Nwoffiah, you are not allowed to speak Igbo anywhere on the college campus. It was called vernacular, and it was punishable. It was a punishable offense, even to your own brother, or brother in this case, because it was an all-boys school. It was an offense to speak that. And you were supposed to say, I had also those things. You know, you were supposed to dismiss it in such a way that connotes that it's actually bush or less than. You were made at an impressionable age to discount the very essence of your identity, which is your language, the window to your soul. And some of us, what did we know? We didn't know any better. It was a good thing during holidays to even sometimes pretend that we no longer understood our grandparents when they spoke Igbo to us. And people laughed about it and even hailed us for it. And so you think about that. And you were in that situation for 6 years, the most impressionable years of your life. And then maybe you got an admission to London or somewhere else and you left, and then you go back and begin to do work. But by the time you come out of that experience, something has shifted in you. When you run into another Igbo person in a public space, you were driven to speaking English to them, as opposed to greeting them and saying hello in Igbo. It became the transaction. We believed, therefore, that success was now based on your proximity to whiteness. And so the extent to which you looked like, you talked like, you ate like, behaved like, you know, acted like a white person and dressed like a white person was the extent to which you were seen as successful. And this sickness was not just on the Igbos. I'm talking about generally what the colonialism did to the African psyche. But it seems to have had its own interesting effect on the Igbos. Because unlike, as you see, unlike the expressions within the Yoruba context and even the Hausas, you know, the average PhD Yoruba person runs into the next PhD Yoruba person, and the first thing they exchange, their pleasantries will be in Yoruba, 9 times out of 10. Same with the Hausas. And they can hold conversations completely in Yoruba and Hausa. Rarely would you find that within our Igbo expressions. And we've taken that on as something of pride because the colonialists wanted us to believe that that was how it was supposed to be. And then when I talk about the physical and the spiritual realm, we are Catholics. And I know those non-Catholics that are joining us are very much welcome to this conversation, of course. But Catholics or not, Christians, the idea that if you go to any church in Nigeria today, and take a photograph of a black Jesus and hang it up there, they will crucify you the very next second. The Jesus pictures that you must have within our faith belief system must be a blue-eyed, blonde, white person. When you call the typical African children together and tell them to paint for you the picture of the devil, it's going to be a black person. And paint for you the picture of angels in heaven, it will be lily white folk. So if our grandparents went through that, believed that to be true, and then our parents went through that, believed that to be true, and we are born into that, and we believe that to be true, how is it then that we are expected to trust one another when your image reminds me of the very essence of devil? And then how is it that I am not supposed to feel subservient to a white person when their aura and their image and depiction reminds me of the God that I need to bow down to and worship? So we need to understand some of these things at different levels, because it is when we understand that that we can begin to reflect on why do we act a certain way and how can we rebuild and reclaim our own worth and our own stories and be able to assert ourselves in our full Igbo-ness. And so the whole idea is that, unfortunately, then, when we arrive in these parts of the world, one of the unfortunate fallouts is that when we then encounter our historical diaspora brothers and sisters, the African Americans that came here 400 years ago plus, because of that, because of the way we have been raised, we sometimes do not even understand why we find it difficult to connect with or associate with or participate in whatever is going on, because we believe that sometimes, not all, but some of us may not feel that, participating, that we share the same identity, so to speak, or that their issues are not our issues. And so we retreat. We find ourselves in these interesting bubbles that we create. And it's not only the Igbos, but I'm speaking in the context of the Igbo family, because this is the conversation we're having. A lot of us immigrants come in here and we have the nice homes and we are doing very well. And then we don't participate. We go to work, we have very good jobs, and we go home. During the Black Lives Matter movement, a lot of us were not out there participating. We don't go to city council meetings, even just to listen. We don't go to school board meetings because we are busy doing the work of being successful, as the Igbos are known to do. The backdrop of some of that is the messaging that the stories we carry, that this is not really home, that home is always going to be home in Igbo land, which is true. But to understand that when you begin to raise families and have your children here, that home also for them perhaps is here, and then ancestral home is back in Nigeria. And so we owe it to our children and to ourselves to step out of our comfort zones and connect with the African American communities here, because these are our brothers and sisters by blood, generations removed. And so, as Dr. Nnamdi Azikiwe was saying, it is actually a duty that the Igbo has to carry through, because we are the ones we've been waiting for, that we need to be able to step out and reach out to our brothers and sisters that have been here and participate in what is happening and possibly offer the Igbo worldview and the Igbo wisdom in the movement. And so I just wanted to bring that about, because the name calling, the labeling, the projected assumptions, the misinformation, stereotypes, and segregation that we sometimes propagate and comfortably sit in continues to be the most unfortunate realities of our sojourn here in America. I believe that we must confront this inconvenient truth and purge ourselves of what I call the poison of colonialism and colonial mentality. Bob Marley talks about we have to emancipate ourselves from mental slavery. It's a combination of all these factors. The colonial thing that has numbers that have been done to us, we need to recognize it, we need to call it out, and we need to intentionally figure out how to get out of that. When we find ourselves not being driven, not feeling empathy for what is happening within the so-called Black communities, we have to ask ourselves, why are we not moved? And why can we not participate? One of the, like I said, as immigrant Africans, the histories of colonialism, liberation struggles, one of the things I also wanted to draw attention to, and then we'll begin to wrap this up, is that in conversations that I have with our colleagues, immigrant Africans, people don't realize that this divide that we have between us and our historical diaspora brothers and sisters, this so-called tension is actually new. It never used to be that way. It never used to be that way. Because in the early 1900s, people like W.E. Du Bois, they started what they call the African Congresses. And they were having these amazing meetings all over in Europe and in North America. And these meetings were a call for children of Africa to, W.E. Du Bois, what he did was he was able to connect the struggle for independence on the African continent. He connected that to the civil rights struggle and pulled together the vanguards of the movement from the Caribbean islands, from the African continent, from the United States, and they will meet to exchange ideas and strategize on how they can purge their different countries of this thing that was racism in itself, being expressed both on the African continent and here in the United States. And so there was always this conversation that was going on. Many of us do not know that W.E. Du Bois is buried today in Ghana. One of the founding fathers of the NAACP, he lies in state in Ghana. And Dr. Nnamdi Azikiwe was actually his typist here in the United States. And Dr. Nnamdi Azikiwe actually attended Lincoln University, a historical Black college. And when Dr. Nnamdi Azikiwe went back and then finally went to Ghana to study newspaper, he was the one that told Kwame Nkrumah, who was his mentee, recommended him to go to Lincoln. And so Kwame Nkrumah came over here and also went to Lincoln University, a historical Black college. Dr. Nnamdi Azikiwe was classmates with Thurgood Marshall. And Thurgood Marshall was the lawyer in the Brown versus Board of Education that talked about school integration. It's a very interesting story. And in 1957, when Kwame Nkrumah became the Prime Minister of Ghana, Dr. Martin Luther King was in Ghana with a delegation of over 40 African-American leaders, civil rights leaders. They were there to witness the swearing-in ceremony of one of the brothers from a historical Black university, stepping up to champion and lead an independent African country. And he did not stop there. Nigeria got its independence in 60. In 63, became a republic. When Dr. Nnamdi Azikiwe was sworn in as the first African-born Governor General of Nigeria, he wrote a handwritten note to Dr. King and invited him to Nigeria, and Dr. King again showed up with a massive delegation of African Americans. You see, we don't know about all of this stuff. And so sometimes we think that, these misconceptions, no, people were working together. Seldom would you see in the 60s and the late 50s any civil rights big rally that you wouldn't have people like Tom Mboya from Kenya mounting the podium and saying, I bring you greetings from your cousins from the African continent. Now, let's talk about someone like Tom Mboya of Kenya, was very good friends with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Now, check this out. Dr. Tom Mboya of Kenya organized for 40 Kenyans to come to the United States on scholarship. He raised money. Dr. King actually gave his own personal fund into that fund because they were very good friends. 40 Kenyans were brought to the United States to study. Barack Obama Sr. was one of those. His son ended up becoming the president of the United States. So this thing has always been a joint struggle and a joint movement. And people ask, where did it all fall apart? I'll tell you where it all fell apart. Because when independence started happening on the African continent, and the civil rights, the gains of the civil rights began to get manifest here with, of course, the integration, the Civil Rights Act, and all of that. The vanguards and the leaders of the movement on both sides of the pond moved, in our case, our vanguard, our leaders moved into the colonial quarters and became pseudo-colonialists. And they began to eat like, drink like, act like white people. They started drinking tea in high noon, having boys' quarters and servants and maids and all of that. And they became colonizers themselves. Similar thing was happening here in the shores of the United States, because with the integration, it was a one-way flight out of the Black neighborhoods. And so the elite left and moved on into white suburbia and felt comfortable. And then they forgot each other because they thought the war had been won, not knowing they just won a battle, but the war was a long game. And so they got comfortable in their different places and they thought the struggle was over. And so the divide began and we stopped talking to each other. So I believe that our charge as Igbo-Americans is to revisit some of this history and begin to participate in what's going on. Maybe not for those of us, people like me that now have gray hair, but at least we must leave a legacy for our children to help them be the ones that can reconnect Africa's children. That in itself is when we fulfill, in my opinion, our manifest destiny of our transnational identity as Igbos. Again, I started by saying I've had the privilege to travel, and I do because of my job. I go to the Caribbean islands. You go to a place like Haiti, they have a dance they call Igbo. That's the name of the dance. And then when they start dancing, you might as well see our young girls and boys dancing in our villages. If you go to a place like Grenada, I mean, there are places where you go, and actually when you listen carefully to some of the songs, you go, oh my gosh, you know, it's as if somebody's showing up from 3 centuries ago, you know, it's kind of it's very surreal. It's an out-of-body experience. And they are close yet so far. But I believe that as Igbo-Americans, we kind of have this, we're sitting in this space. And as Dr. Nnamdi Azikiwe said, this is something that has been entrusted to us as something that we must carry. We must carry that torch and begin to find our brothers and sisters across the world. We must re-educate ourselves and our children, because what is happening right now is that the Igbo language itself is fast moving towards extinction. And the United Nations has already recorded that they're projecting that perhaps in 50 years to 100 years, that Igbo language will become one of those languages that will be, you know, in extinction. And it's unfortunate, but the beauty of what we do as Igbo Catholic community is preserving and in the ways that we can. And so language transmission, you know, culture transmission is so important, and we must guard it jealously. And kudos to the young ones that are even stepping right out and forcing us, their parents, to teach them these things. And with modern day technology, we should be talking about apps and spaces and methodologies that we can preserve this language and have people be able to learn and study and all of that stuff, because that's one of the ways of preserving culture. And I think our sojourn here, in my opinion, will be meaningless if, when all is said and done, our children are going to sit here again and start wondering. And so I'll leave you with one final thing that I say, and I tell everybody, even my African-American brothers and sisters, it's almost an exercise, but it's something that I will keep preaching until my last breath. We don't tell our stories enough. We don't. And we must understand the power of telling our own stories. As we live here and we stay here in the United States, how many of our children can name their grandparents, great-grandparents, and great-great-grandparents and name them like that? How many of them know the story of the places you come from and I come from? So it's important that we begin to tell these stories to our children so that they can have something that they can pass on to their own children. The exercise I give everybody is this. This thing called the cell phone is a very important tool. I challenge every adult Igbo person. Find a quiet room just by yourself. Turn that phone into a video, record and turn the phone on yourself. Introduce yourself to that phone. My name is Chike Nwoffiah. I am from so place. I was born here. My father is this. Name your father. Name your mother. My siblings are, name as many of them as you can remember. My father's father is this person. My mother's father. Just keep naming and then tell your story and turn that phone off. If you would imagine, and I start with this exercise where I tell people, if you could recall, have your grandfather show up today, how magical would it be that he sits with you and tells you all he knows about himself? Wouldn't that be an amazing gift? But a lot of us don't have that luxury because, of course, technology was not there when they were here. And unfortunately, a lot of us maybe did not even get to know who they are. Because that was not given to us, what I just explained to you will be the gift that you're going to give 5 generations hence. How magical would it be that your great-great-great-grandchildren will push a button and you appear and introduce yourself to them and tell them about their own ancestry? We cannot afford to have them sit here 2-3 generations hence and wonder, did Chike walk this planet? I wish I knew more about him. What made him who he was? Why did he even go to America? Because believe me, if we don't do it, there will be no record. It will fade into distant memory. Thank you all for listening. God bless.
Thank you so much, Chike and Nwoffiah, just for your words and for your message here to us in the audience today. I never even asked, is it okay if I just call you Uncle or Uncle Chike? Sorry. All right, cool. Perfect. Yeah, so I want to thank you all. And also, as we're going on with the conversation part of this, I encourage everyone in the audience to please input any questions that you'd like to ask to Chike in the chat. And so that will help to facilitate all the questions that are going on today. And I want to thank all of you for coming and for this conversation series today. I'd be remiss if I didn't at least also add in an introduction of Chike. I know it almost sounds late to add an introduction after the speech and the words that he's given to us, but Mr. Nwoffiah, Uncle Chike, is quite a big honor in the Bay Area community for all the work that he's done. An educator, a former adjunct professor of African history at Menlo College, a media exec, also an award-winning writer, producer, director, and the director of the Silicon Valley African Film Festival, and a member of the Silicon Valley Black Legends Hall of Fame for all his work for the community. And so, Uncle, thank you so much again for being here and for your words. We're really happy to have you here today. I want to just kind of jump into, just coming off of the words you've already spoken in the speech. And there's just so much there. So I'm hoping that I can get to most of it. But the first one was on labels. I'm, just so I think intrigued when I hear about labels because this is a conversation we've also had within my family about, the fact that obviously as my dad who came here in 1982, and came straight from Nigeria, that there wasn't a lot of, I guess, leeway in terms of identity, right? I'm an Igbo person. There's not really a lot of flexibility on that. Whereas for me, I always said that's different because you talked about Du Bois, and one of Du Bois's main um, ideas they put forth was called double consciousness, right? The idea that as Black Americans, you're Black, but you're also American, and how do we kind of reckon those? I remember reading that in high school and being like, I have like a triple consciousness because it feels like when I'm here in this house, right? I'm Nigerian, I'm Igbo. I don't get called by Todd, they call me Nanaya, which is, his father's father and whatnot. When step out of the house, as soon as I step out of the house, like you said, there's that Black identity, right? And especially when I talk and the way I wear my hair, a lot of people will be like, oh, make assumptions. But when I go back to Nigeria and I speak, they say, oh, he's an American. So how do we reckon all of these three? So I'm curious, just in general about, from your experiences, where do we kind of situate ourselves as Igbos in Silicon Valley? And how do you kind of think about these labels and kind of orienting them within like the next generation?
Oh yeah, you're quite right. And again, I think at this point, I would like us to just really open it up because I never believe that I know better than anybody else. But thank you for raising that, and that's why I was pointing to it. There's a
Mhm.
fluidity of identities, and so when I talk about transnationalism, of course, it's one foot here, one foot over there. But then there is the triple and quadruple identities, like I gave in the example, where even in the course of one day you're flowing through all of these multiple identities, and you're code switching every single time, because you have to, you, I mean, it's just like it's right there. It's automatic. It's just happening. But the reason I mentioned that, I'm glad you pointed to that, is when we don't call it out,
Mhm.
we don't own it, and therefore we can't put our hands around it. And
Mhm.
so, but when we identify that, just like you mentioned, then you're in your interaction with your parents, that has been put on the table, you know what I mean? And so then there is a place there is somewhere to begin in some conversations, because sometimes it causes friction, but if we don't know that that's what the friction is about, then because it's not spoken about and all of that, you're talking this way and they're talking this way, and both of you are not even meeting at the traffic light because there's no traffic light. The freeway going this way, they're going this way. And like I said, for us that have kids here, sometimes the way we are flowing through the identities, we are flowing from here to there. And those of you that were born here are probably starting from the middle point and going back, and sometimes stopping and going forward again. And so sometimes it can create some tension. But there is no one answer to it, because I think the family dynamics would have to play into that. However, what is important is that that's why I talked about it, that
Mhm.
we stop ourselves to understand all of these multiple identities that we carry, because unconsciously we are flowing through them without even knowing that that's what's happening. And then when our kids, start growing up, then they start moving through their own, and we think that their own flow is exactly as ours, and it is not, and it's never going to be. And then when you have your own children, they're not even going to have the same kind of flow as you do, and so it's really interesting. And but I think it's just knowing and naming it is the way to is the way to go about, and have those conversations. We must tell ourselves, and and understand that that's what's happening. And like I said, it's not just happening here, even in Nigeria. You know, you go to Nigeria now, and a lot of Igbo kids cannot speak a lick of Igbo. None. A lot. And a lot of parents are proud of that.
Mhm.
Oh, Father Sokoifa, they don't speak that language in Nigeria.
Mhm.
And those of us out here are yearning for that. And then you go back home and no, they don't speak Igbo. Wow.
Mhm.
Yeah. So thanks for calling it out. And yeah, if anybody wants to, throw in something, we can do that. Or there are any other points of questions, comments?
Please. Yeah, and so to the audience, definitely we want this to be interactive. And so if you do, again, in the chat or also by raising your hands, and that could also, yeah, input you to, speak in the conversation as well. But yeah, I'm happy and, I'm pleased with your response, Uncle, because of the fact that I think that you bring like a good, and while you were speaking, I think that's something I also enjoyed hearing was this idea about hearing Igbo and being able to speak Igbo, especially as someone who was born here. It's something that I've talked about with a lot of my friends, and that, a lot of different cultures for folks. Obviously, I grew up here in San Jose, so a lot of Spanish-speaking folks. And then from an early age, some of them, it almost was like as if Spanish was their first language before English, or and that's the case with a lot of folks, and something that I think I've struggled with as well. One of the things that you talked about is there's a very specific way that we say that, in Debo, that when they train children, it's very specific. So for example, you mentioned like generosity, sharing with people, respect for elders and whatnot. I'm curious, with that, what adjustments do you feel have to be made for the American context of, training children for Igbos? And yeah, what do you say to the second generation as well, who are trying to learn Igbo, and at sometimes, I've heard both, where sometimes, it isn't talked about, but a lot of my Igbo friends also were born here don't speak Igbo.
Yeah.
That's something that, they weren't kind of raised with, and that, now even I mentioned to my mom, I think last year during the summer, I took an Igbo class online, trying to learn Igbo and having to,
Right.
kind of seek that out for myself. So how, yeah, just I guess speaking
And
to.
that's it. And I know Dr. Neka has her hand up, and and just to quickly respond, and then she can jump in, is I think also for those of us adults, we have to give our children grace. We have to give them grace, and also for our children, you have to give yourself grace, because you were born here. It doesn't matter whether your dad and mom or both, one, is Igbo and all of that. Luckily, and that's what I was talking about towards the end of my talk, that now we're in an age where there are, there's technology out there that can help. And when I say give yourself grace, seek it out. For those of us that are your uncles and parents and all of that, let's also try and create through things like the Igbo Catholic organization, those kinds of things, language classes or access to those kinds of things, perhaps. Um, you know, but yeah, seek it out. I don't go at it as if, okay, I want to learn so that I can become or can start speaking it like my father or mom, that kind of a thing. Your generation is a global generation. And so the extent to which you can, understand it or learn it, great. Igbo is not the easiest language to learn, supposedly, but it's also easy in the sense that if you understand the underpinning of the language, everything else flows from it's interesting. If you break it down, everything flows from just a very simple set of words and, vowels and that type of thing. But my answer to you, or my suggestion is, seek it out yourself. Even if a schedule is all you're able to get through in the first year, and the next thing and the next thing, that's fine. Give yourself some grace. But while you're doing that, research the culture itself. Because one thing is to learn the language. You may not even know how to speak the language, but you come from old. You come from such a very rich culture that, unfortunately, what colonialism did to the Igbos particularly, because when they came to Igbo land, they couldn't find the monarch, that they could go through, and they just went crazy. They were like, these people, we are going to figure out a way to subdue them, and intellectually and all of that. And I mean, they did a number that was specific to the Igbos. But we come from a very rich history that is out there now. The Igbo historians are writing, there are, books and all of that stuff. And so while you're trying to learn the language, in my opinion, research the very proud journey of the Igbos, and even if you can't speak the language, that in my opinion will carry you through. All right. So let me not take too much space. I know Dr. Neka wants to say something.
Yes, please, Dr. Neka.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Nwoffiah, for this life-changing presentation. We truly appreciate it. My daughter is actually on this call, and she's 17, and she said to me, "Mom, you guys are late to this conversation." And I find it quite interesting that she said that, but really it is a wake-up call for all of us. And, you know, it's time for us to get comfortable being uncomfortable. And you highlighted very, very important points. What we had to go through culturally before we came here. And of course, we got here, there was no playbook that was handed to us in terms of raising our children. So yes, there is that confusion. Who are we? Who are they? Right. And so having this type of conversation and really calling a spade is where it begins. And so I just want to say thank you. And we'll certainly start the recording that you recommended.
I also wanted to chime in very quickly, Todd. And so thank you so much, Chike, for just kind of taking us through this process and also taking us through this journey, right? Because a lot of us have been dealing with it like we know how, like how Dr. Neka mentioned. But I did want to just talk from a parent perspective that it will be, I really feel parents should reflect on their values and consider which values are important for them to pass on to their children, and use those values, to kind of know which ones you're going to pass on and which ones are just more specific to you and your experiences and how you grew up. But the one big thing I want to put in there is the flexibility. Sometimes some parents are very rigid, right? And they forget that we are all struggling with a different culture, even the parent themselves, and that different culture signifies different other activities. So we really need to just continue to be very flexible in how we manage. We need to remember that our children are trying to create their own experiences, and then also and also struggling and trying to kind of manage the culture themselves. And you mentioned that, Chike, just the struggle, the everyday work of life that we're dealing with. And just wanted to put a plug in that we're in a different time and space, and we parents need to remember that even for us ourselves, when we grew up, from where we grew up was quite different from those who are growing up now, and it's even worse for our children who are here.
Thank you. I think I have a question, Chike. Yes. And first of all, thank you for this very important talk. You pointed out something that I think is important to hear more from. You say that this divide between African Americans who came here 400 years ago and those of us who are here has not always been there. And I totally agree with you. And I'm curious to know, to what extent do you think is still a machination of the forces of neo-colonialism? Because many of us, we think that, neo-colonialism, many of us don't even understand that, and we think, because as people say, it's still well under life. Kwame Nkrumah, his book, Neo-colonialism, the last stage of imperialism, and the most dangerous one, he called it. And even Achebe said in Things Fall Apart that they put a knife on the things that held us together and we've fallen apart. And I say, when you look at those things that existed in the 50s and 60s, W. Du Bois, Kwame Nkrumah, Marcus Garvey, all these guys working together. They were working towards a Pan-Africanism. And it's still what people have started to kind of resurrect, because, as the way Kwame Nkrumah put it, is either we unite, and they mean the whole children of Africa, or we perish. And my question to you is that, what do you think in your travels, in your experience, what do you think we can do at our individual levels to begin to foster this relationship? Because the neo-colonialists know that this is the panacea of imperialism, and they want to make sure they nip it in the bud. And they're very strong. So my question is that, what do you think we can do at our individual levels to begin to foster that relationship?
Yeah, I mean, very simple and very practical things. But you're quite right. It's intentional. When the flags of colonialism were falling, but remember the very first sets of schools that they built for us, they call them grammar schools. So they teach you the grammar so you can interpret for them and then lead them where you become the wolf and take them to the hen. Coop and all of that, so you can go in and be translators and all of that stuff. And so they intentionally made sure that they created that sense, and that's what I also talked about, where there was a sense of, making sure that they suppressed our own identity and made us believe that it was Bush, and so there was an aspiration to become like the white person. They knew that if they could take a hold of our minds, which they really did, because if you look at Africa, post-colonial Africa till present day, I bet you that over 60 to 70%, now the numbers are dropping, but over 60 to 70% of the African leaders went through the type of education that we're talking about. And so their minds are warped, mentally gone. That's why the African president has a cough. The only thing they think about is to fly to the colonial country, not to build something in the home country, because the mind is already gone. It's when it's white is better. And so that's what is playing out. That is what is playing out as we see it. And then therefore in relationship to our cousins here, a lot of us Nigerians were very proud and proudly circulating this research from University of Austin, Texas, that talked about, amongst every ethnicity, Nigerians have the highest number of PhDs or which is great. But when people like Bill O'Reilly are the people pushing that narrative, you got to ask yourself why. Because it started getting to the point, and I was part of conversations where I started seeing Nigerians not understanding that the way this narrative is being pushed, yes, we celebrate that, the accomplishment of Nigerians in America. But when it's being pushed to make us believe, or to tell the African American, you see, you have no reason. You see what I mean? Then we need to understand what the game is all about. Because nobody stops to say what type of Nigerians are in America. This is already pre-selected elite type. So you can't compare them to the general population. You see what I mean? So it's for us to identify these things and call them when we see them. That's one. The second thing on a personal level is, how many of us here, I mean, most of us are in San Jose area. I belong to the Black Leadership Kitchen Cabinet in Silicon Valley. This is a coming together of Black leaders in Silicon Valley that meets every first Thursday of the month, and we don't participate in these things, Chris Elias, Molly, I don't remember any other person. And then of course, Dr. Obina, sometimes I see you in some of these spaces, but there are things that are happening that we just don't show up for. We don't. And we have to face that truth and ask ourselves, when it's a funeral, we are there. When it's baby shower, we are there. But when it's something about the Black community, how many of us know where the African American Community Services Agency in San Jose is even located? And so it's easy for us to say, they're not inviting us. Who are they? Who are you waiting for? I showed up, nobody invited me. I mean, it is your space. And there are, so this whole thing, there are little things we need to start doing right away, Because when that cop sees you driving and they put on their siren, they're not going to know you have an accent. Trust me. You know, they just see a Black person driving and they are coming after you. You know, we have the San Jose NAACP right here. The Black Chamber of Commerce is right here. You know, all of these organizations, 100 Black women, 100 Black men, all of that, we need to at least participate. You know, we need to come on out, you know, and be part. There are some, you know, in San Jose, there's a sister who's running for school board right now. How many of us are willing, you know, to actually entertain a coffee with somebody like that and say, listen, the Nigerian community, we want to have coffee with you and give you $50 each and let you know that we want you in that office. So those are the very simple things at the minimum that we need to start doing. And you know, it doesn't take much to do these things. But unfortunately, we don't just show up. We don't.
Thank you, Chike, for your response, Uncle, for your response. I want to allow the NICCSJ, Nigerian Igbo Catholic Community of San Jose, to unmute.
So yeah, sorry, it's me, Gozi. I think I logged on with that account number, but I have a follow-up question, Chike. Thank you so much. This is a very important discussion to have, if possible, routinely, because it kind of talked about that elephant in the room that we try and, you know, sometimes we neglect, and is there in that room, and we really have to talk about it. You know, yes, we have our own part to play, but my question is that, how about those our cousins? I mean, those African Americans. I would tell you my experience when I first come into this country. The first city I landed was Newark, New Jersey. More than 90% African American. And my first time in a public transport, I saw an African American yelling at an African, of course, because from the accent, you know that he wasn't born here, but an elderly man, and say, you bloody African, you bloody African. And that creates an impression to me that, wow, even those that my approach as a cousin doesn't even accept me. I mean, like, this person is calling an African bloody African, but she herself is an African American. And, you know, that is something that I've been trying to fight against. You know, and I say, they are not all like that. I've met some good ones. But so my question to you is, even though we have our own parts to play, how about those our cousins? Are they welcoming us with open hands, or are they seeing us as those competitors coming in here and taking up their jobs? Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, you know, but we can't use the singular, you know, to make policy. You know, we all have our battle scars. Even amongst our own Igbo people, you know, whether you're from here or from there, this and this, you know, so you can't, you know, we can use some of those. It's going to be there and it's not going to stop. But again, you have to also understand, just like I said in our case, and I did talk about also what's operating, you know, the whole thing, you know, the way that Africa continues to be presented, remember, which Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie called the single story narrative, is to demean the African continent. Why? It's intentional, because if the African American begins to see Africa as a place of pride, a place that they can gravitate towards, then it means that there's an inherent power that they can have. So it is intentional to make them feel and see that this place that they call their place of origin, because it's a response also to what happened, like Obina was saying, what happened in those 40s, 50s, and 60s. So now the neo-colonialists that are operating here in America are doing their best to separate the African American from the continent. And so when you turn to the media, it's devastation, it's hunger, it's starvation. So there's nothing there. There's no there. There's nothing to be proud of. So if you're claiming your African ancestry, why would you even, there's nothing proud to be. And so the brainwashing is also going on. And so when they see, the idea is for the kind of reaction. So when they see the African, they don't see, brother, they don't see sister. It's like, you monkey, you this, you this, you this, whatever it is. It can, some of us have been called worse things. But we have to understand that we cannot operate within that. We have to actually recognize that that's going to happen, just like we call them names. Let's call it what it is. We call them names, we do whatever and all of that. But the space I want to operate in, the space I operate in is not in that space. It's like tomorrow you can easily, next week or the week after, you can easily go to a Black Leadership Kitchen Cabinet meeting and you break bread and be welcomed with open arms. I produce every last Saturday in February in the city of San Jose what is called Black Family Day. I produce that. I don't see us attending. And so we have to operate in spaces where we know the conversation can happen, the brotherhood and all of that. And then, yes, it's not about saving the world, but all I'm saying is that we can start within our own, like Dr. Bina was saying, where can we start? What is it? What are the little things we can do individually? And forget about all of that. Yeah, there are people that are never going to come out of their ignorance just on both sides of the conversation. And you're not going to, I don't think we need to waste a lot of energy with those people. Because ultimately, think of our children, what is their own identity, And remember, I keep coming back to the Barack Obama story, all right? For far too long, African Americans here have been in the political process trying to get to that most powerful of offices, right? It took a free-born African to come to the United States, have a child with a daughter of the oppressor, to beget a son that doesn't have a drop of slavery, to become the first president of these United States. So if you really think about the spiritual importance of all of that culminated in the Obama presidency, it is more than just, shifting tables. There's something prophetic about that process. There's something prophetic about it. But remember that when Barack first came out, some of his very early, antagonists were some of the elite African Americans in Chicago, because they said he was not Black enough. He didn't have the Black experience. He cannot represent. In fact, up to today, some of them in certain camps still within the African American community. But that didn't stop Barack, And so you're right. We have to recognize that that is going to be there. But that's why I always talk about it. It wasn't always that way. And remember, even in the time of W.E. Du Bois, even in the time of Tom Mboya, Zikiwe, Martin Luther King, all of Patrice Lumumba, Malcolm X were like this, I mean, gosh, I can go on and on. But even in those times, there were still the naysayers that didn't want to associate with these Africans. There were people that were telling Kwame Nkrumah that the reason he could move freely was because he was the African, and they were not treating him like an African, a Black American, a Negro, that kind of a thing, all of that stuff. And that's always going to be there, because that's the story of our world. But I personally believe, and I may be wrong, but this is the way I move in spaces, and this has been my story here, that we have to reach out. We have to participate. I love what we do in the Igbo Catholic community when we celebrate Black History Month and we bring the Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity and some of the other African American organizations. We already moving in those spaces. I think we just need to do more individually and let folk know that we're here and we want to participate. They're waiting for us. I mean, I have been, gosh, I can't even tell you enough how I mean, you know, Chief Obilo, I've had him come and pour libation at the Black History Month program, you know, and they are just in awe when he's there with the kola nut and he's speaking Igbo and all of that. And, you know, gosh, we have so much to offer, you know? So I think we can take advantage of that and do more and be the source of light for this coming together of all Africa's children.
I was muted. Thank you, Uncle. Just yeah, again for your words on this. I think that, you know, coming from the mental health perspective, I think that, you know, what you say, I think reigns true a lot in terms of the fact that colonialism has separated us. And this, as you mentioned, this trip across the Atlantic, some who took it earlier than others, and, you know, our American descendants of slaves, some who, you know, took it in the last few decades and now, you know, sometimes get this label of being African immigrants. And the fact that that's, you know, a separation by design. And as the fact that, you know, I'm happy that you mentioned as well, teaching your kids to deal with this as, you know, this African immigrant or title is because of the fact that, you know, while African Americans, you know, have this sometimes mental health concerns about the fact that, you know, they aren't able to trace that history, that they don't have that connection. They feel like they have to go and seek out African ancestry DNA tests to get that heritage back. And the fact that for us who are first generation in America, we now also have to deal with the repercussions of trying to navigate within that system and not feeling like we're fully accepted in certain spaces, even amongst, you know, people who are Black American classmates and whatnot. And the fact that all of that, you know, can lead to some mental health concerns. So I appreciate you for just shining a light on that. We do have one question from the chat. I do want to keep an eye on time as well. So I wanted to ask this main question and see if we could open it up as well. But really, the final question I had was really just, you know, you've given a lot of advice, a lot of steps for us to undertake. What would you see are like your biggest dreams for the youth, for Igbo youth, for first generation African youth? I guess, what do you just hope to see in the future? You know, you've mentioned this globalization, and I'm curious.
Yeah, I love the energy that I'm getting from our young Igbo youth. I think you all are going to be a lot better than us. You know, when we came here, we came from nothing, like Dr. Neka said, there was no playbook, you know, and so I would say give us grace. We had to make the mistakes. We had to focus to survive. America ain't easy, bro. You know what I mean? You know, you kick the butt, you know, and we had to dig down. We had to really dig deep to even, because we are Igbos and we never fail, you know. And so when they said, you know, go 1 mile, we had to go 10 miles. And we bent down and built what we've been able to build because of you, because the Igbos everything we do is all about the children. The Igbo man can starve as long as his children go to Harvard, kind of thing. And that to us is wealth. It's not about, you know, the clothes on your back. It's how are your children doing? And so now that we've done that, to a great extent, the baton is for you to now, you know, sit in that, but also move in that space and move with pride. And so to connect with each other, to continue. And it's actually, you are the ones, just like the story of Barack Obama. It wasn't his father, it was him. You are the ones that will be the cultural, you know, the bridge builders. You are the ones that need to. And even for us at our age, I may say all this stuff, but it may be hard or more difficult for us to start showing up at these meetings, kind of thing, and feel comfortable and all that. But you are the ones that can move in those spaces and be the ones that connect. And so please give us grace, but you got our blessing. But just go, take the baton and run. We had to focus because we needed to provide this life for you. Now we've been able to create something, but we need you to be the ones that bring the communities back. So that's the one thing I would say. And then the other thing I will also say is interview your parents. Interview them and record those interviews. If you still have any grandmas or aunties and all of those things, take your phone and interview them. Tell them to tell you, let them sing songs to you. You know, what was it like growing up as a little girl? What did you like to do? Were there any stories, any folk tales your mom? Let them do that. I share that because I had this singular privilege. My mom is still alive, and I was in Nigeria in November. And one day, she and I were the only people in the entire house. And I turned on my my recorder, and for almost 5 hours, we were alone in the house. And I became a little kid again. We were telling folk tales, and she was remembering and laughing and cracking up and singing and stopping. And then she would remember her auntie, and then she would tell me about this woman. And, you know, and we're just recording. It wasn't video, we're just voice memo, because I didn't want to interrupt. I just put the phone on the table, and we were just, and then we would take a break. We will eat with that, you know, all of that stuff. That is something, and it was just last November. That is something that I'm going to forever cherish and pass on and pass on and pass on. So do that, make a point. You know, we're so tuned into, you know, trying to survive here. So you got to stop us, you know, sometimes and say, Mom, can you sit down for a minute? You know, can you tell me this? And then maybe they'll talk for 30 minutes, the phone rings because they need to go take care of business. That's fine, continue doing it. Grab as many things as possible. We're all not gonna be here forever, you know? So anyway, connect with each other, record your stories. There are 2 hands up. I don't know how much time you still have, but so hopefully that helps.
Awesome. Thank you, Uncle. Yeah, so I wanted to take these 2 questions in the chat, and then we can kind of sign off. So first was Father Anthony.
Okay. Hi, Doc. Sorry. I want to first of all thank you. I came in late because I'm working. I had to start listening during my break. But I have to thank you for linking thought with purpose and for the wonderful admonitions you have given us. Definitely, we are all going home with baskets of knowledge. I think I was intrigued by the fact when you mentioned integration between us and the Black Americans. It's a very huge one for me because I'm talking from my own implicit bias, if you call it that way, that since I came in here, I will tell you the simple truth. If I walk into any office, I am praying and doing my rosary not to walk to a Black guy or to walk to a Black woman, because most times they are always antagonistic towards me. That had happened several times, and that had always been my result until once somebody debunked that my bias. So my question to you, I know you have profiled so many solutions today. I wanted to make it long, but let me make it short. My question to you might be, please, in the midst of these bias, from mine and from them, because I have also had opportunity of talking with 1 or 2 of them, I feel that there is this, I don't want to use the word hatred, but there is this antagonism happening. How do you feel we will begin the healing? That's my question. I love the way you have given us practical steps for the youth or for the young ones to start the process. Please, are there practical processes we could take to start the healing on the part of myself and on the part of those whom I think are still treating us from their own biases and from prejudices or what I would call antagonism? That's my simple question. Are there practical steps that will help us to start this process of healing?
Yeah, and I know that when Todd finishes his research, all of this will be taken care of as soon as, because that's where he's locating his research. But just quickly, thank you for that. There is nothing, like I keep saying, you know, it's the little things. Wangai Maathai, the first African woman to win the Nobel Peace Prize, says the little things that we do that makes the difference. The little, very little things, the one-on-one conversations. But let's also understand, and this is something that we as African immigrants don't want to talk about. We, our ancestors, sold our own people, right? And that oftentimes is not talked about. There was a film that I showed. I'm in the film business and all that, and so I use film as a pathway to courageous conversations. And I'll be happy you know, to have some of these things. And so there was this interesting, beautiful documentary piece that was called Africans versus African Americans. It was done by a Kenyan sister out of UCLA, produced by an African American guy, and is a very raw film on this topic. You know, all the stereotypes, all the things we think about them were all put out there, and all the things they think about us, name call it, they were all put out there. But then the interesting happened when we showed the film. After showing the film, we had a round community conversation between Africans, immigrant Africans, and African Americans, to really, because the license was already there, everything, there was nothing else that you were going to say that was taboo, and already been said on the film. So we began to have a conversation. How do we move past the anger, the grief? And so you, depending on who you're interacting with, you have to also understand, depending on what level they are at the point of interaction. They're talking about reparations now. So the questions are, oh, you Africans are thinking you're going to get reparations when you are the ones that sold us. And I mean, we can sit in that type of ugly conversation for a long time, and we're not going to get anywhere. So depending on who you meet, I would say, yes, they might be coming at you. I personally, and I'll share with you, I personally look at things from, you know, interesting perspectives. So when somebody's coming at me with that, and we all have, I would say, I too have been in that situation where I'm going to a place, I say, like, I go to even post office, I'm like, oh my gosh, I don't want that, like, you know, because I'm feeling the energy already that it's not going to go, it's not going to go well. But I also have come to the point, as my gray hair continues to add on, I've come to the point where I have to see their humanity and see it as, what is it that is going on in their head that is making them see me this way? And it's the same kind of thing that is making our people bleach their skin. It's the same kind of thing that is making us not speak our language back home. So they are playing out their own version of not liking who looks like them. Because if you don't like you, if you don't like what looks like you, if you don't like yourself and you see what looks like you coming at you, you're not going to like what you see. And so for centuries of being put in that type of condition, mentally and otherwise, and then the stories we are told about each other continues to affect how we see each other. And so that's the first place I go these days, as opposed to getting pissed off. I just go to that frame of mind and say, why are they seeing me that way? And yes, you know, if I'm not in a day where I want to have a conversation, I wait until I can go to another person and then, you know, and do my business. But when I find myself in community, and that's where I was talking about these organizations, there are a lot of them out there where you can be in a community and relish being with brothers and sisters who are very conscious, who understand, and who are also working, trying to reconnect with the African identity. When you meet that, it's such a beautiful thing that all of this other negative part really washes away, because now you're in a space where you're moving and interacting with folks that share that welcome you as a brother, that really want you. I mean, I've come into spaces and they would defer to me, you know, and again, I know Chief Obilo is here, and I'm sorry if I'm embarrassing you by calling on you, but I've had instances where I've had to get on the phone and call Chief Obilo and say, you know, bros, you know, can you come and pour libation, because they want that. And I don't want to do it because I know somebody like Chief Obilo is around, and he drops everything and shows up, and they are looking at him like, you know, like this, you know, person has arrived, you know, and there's this deference and respect they give him when he walks in, and then begins to pour libation, to break color, you know, all of that. It's such a beautiful thing to see, you know. So anyway, I like to pay more attention to those kinds of things, and hopefully we're not going to save everybody, you know, but it's real. It is real. Yeah. So anyway, sorry, I got too excited and started talking and talking. I know Todd wants to wrap this thing up. You want to take the next one? Then we close.
Sure. And then also, Uncle, there's someone who's asking what the name of the movie was in the chat.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Okay. First of all, there's the Black Leadership Kitchen Cabinet, BLKC. And so their website is blkc.org. And it's right here in San Jose. It meets every first Thursday. It's a lunch meeting. So, and there's food, you know, we kind of meet around food and that kind of thing. It's open, anybody. There's no qualification to show up. We're not going to do it this Thursday because of, that's July 4th. So I'm trying to figure out if they're going to shift it or just move it to August. But every first Thursday of the month, 12 noon. So if you go to blkc.org, get on the mailing list, and you start getting notices. That's just one of many. Of course, there's the Black leadership, there's the Black Chamber of Commerce. You know, for those of you that have businesses and all of that, you can register and be a member. You know, you can also register with NAACP. There is the African American Community Services Agency that is right there on 6th and Julian. You know, you can even take a meeting over there, you know, one of our meetings, you can tell them, we want to come and meet in that, you know, those kinds of things. They get excited when stuff like that is happening. So anyways, yeah. And I'll be happy to send more to Dr. Obin, and then he can share with the community.
Awesome. So yeah, we have one last question from Nkiriku OKK. This person can unmute. Okay.
Nkiru, are you still there?
Yes, hello.
Okay, thank you.
I want to ask a question.
Not really a question, but a statement. So I'm only 15 years old, but I wanted to connect what you were saying back to like African Americans and like Blacks and like first generations like myself. I go to my high school. We have the BSU, the Black Student Organization or Union, and I have the honor to be on the executive council where I can like oversee everything. And I'm only one of the few Africans on that council. And last March, we had a whole celebration of life and like African culture and African American culture, where we got to intertwine and share our cultures and show to the rest of the student body and like the Caucasians and the Hispanics how our culture is strong and how if we intertwine our culture, it will be so beautiful, and that there isn't any reason for there to be any hatred because we're all from the same place, you know, no matter if we came here 500 years ago, or if we came here 20 years ago, we all have the same fathers, you know? And I feel like I'm just very grateful that I was welcomed into that space, and just everyone there just loves to learn about the African culture. We had the multicultural assembly where I was wearing the traditional Africans with some other Nigerians, Igbo girls too. We were taking pictures, we were posted everywhere. And I was so like overwhelmed with like all that love that was shown to me. And like, I was just, you know, overwhelmed. I liked it a lot. Thank you. That's all I wanted to say.
Wow, that's a beautiful place to end this. Thank you so much, and keep going. And like I was advising, it's your, you know, it's your generation. You all got it, you know, and just keep moving and keep pushing. And yeah, anything we can do to support what's going on, we will do that. Thank you so much, and keep pushing.
It looks like Francisca has her hands for one more question.
I think it was about the name of the movie.
Dr. Obinna, can you unmute her?
Hello. All right.
Hello.
Good evening.
Good evening.
I'm so excited about this. I just want to thank Dr. Chike. I'm actually from Ghana. I got invited by a friend, and I just love the dialogue that's going on right now. And what a better place to spend my evening than to be here. These are topics we don't talk about. You talk about the elephant in the room. And I think about myself sitting in Uber, and the driver was an African-American woman. And we're talking about Africa, Ghana, how Black Americans were going to get property. And she said, oh, no, they're killing us over there. And it was so uncomfortable seeing our people started slavery. I was so uncomfortable with the conversation. But those are things that we need to talk about. And so I just want to say thank you for giving us the strategies. And I just want to say thank you.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. And we'll give you the recipe for the real jollof rice later. So
Awesome.
Thank you.
thank you so much. Appreciate you.
Awesome. So we're a little bit over time, so I wanted to honestly just thank everyone for joining this audience for this joining this amazing conversation speaker series. My name is Toddy Bakalam Owiler. It's been a pleasure and a joy to be your moderator for today's discussion. I want to thank our speaker again, Mr. Chike and Nwoffiah. Thank you so much just for your leadership and for your words and for your message to our community today. I also want to thank the main organizers of the event. First of all, Dr. Obinna Anya for all of his work in organizing this. And then also to my mom, Dr. Ngozi Obilor, for all of her help in organizing this event. I think we possibly can stay a little bit after, just for a few minutes if anyone has any final questions. But thank you all so much. Have an amazing Sunday, and Unu Jishike. Take care.
Thank you.